Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sportsnaut Interview. I am Evan Groat, and today we are talking NFL Draft with Eric Edholm, the lead draft writer for NFL.com. And Eric, there's a lot to get into. We are just 1 month away from the draft, so let's jump right into it. I want to start out our conversation by discussing one of the draft's most intriguing players, and that is Travis Hunter. We know he has the dual position eligibility. Where do you think he fits best going from the college game to the NFL? Is it possible we could seriously see this guy play on both sides of the ball in the NFL?
I think we will. I don't know to what extent, and it's going to obviously depend on which team drafts him, what their needs are for 2025. Obviously very few players have been able to do any kind of real two-way duty, at least in the last 40 plus years or so. I mean, in the 60s, sure, but none of us were really watching football back then. And it really would be quite remarkable to see him impact both sides of the ball like that. Some teams have him as a corner first, others a receiver first. So, clearly I would say there's probably about a half a dozen teams that obviously if you're near the top of the draft or possibly a threat to trade up that are likely landing spots for him. And, I've been trying to dig on the individual landing spots to see where they might view him and stuff. And when I hold back a little bit just because I got a mock draft coming out. But yeah, I mean, take a team like the Giants, who obviously could sit and take him at number 3. He could step in and arguably be their best corner right away. He also would be a tremendous complement to Malik Nabers. You'd have two extremely gifted playmakers on offense that, a offense that hasn't done much in the last few years, saddled by quarterback issues. So whoever's playing quarterback for him, whether it's a rookie or a veteran, would obviously be upgraded. New England would have an interesting debate too. I mean, all those teams in that range are going to go back and forth and decide how much are we going to let him do is basically what we sort of it boils down to, and which side of the ball will the more snaps come on. Again, I just don't think it's going to be a cut and dry answer the same for every team.
Yeah. I don't think he'll have to wait too long to hear his name called on draft night. I want to jump over to the quarterbacks. Every year, quarterback conversation dominates the draft, and it seems like Cam Ward is the consensus number 1. But I want to ask you about Shedeur Sanders because he's the most polarizing quarterback in this year's draft, and he's been beaten up a little bit in the media. Some people saying that maybe he's a little bit arrogant, maybe a little bit brash. Do you think that he's being treated unfairly, or do you think there are legitimate concerns about his character?
Yeah, no, I don't think there really are. I think it's more of knowing what you're going to get, right? Because you get one Sanders, you're going to get the entire Sanders clan. And obviously Deion's a head coach at Colorado. He's got his hands full out there. But, he made it be known even prior to last draft, even to before the 2024 draft was official, that he would be involved in this process. And, there were certain teams he wasn't going to play for and all this stuff. Now, that talk has really kind of calmed down. In fact, Deion, you could kind of hear him almost backtracking a little bit during some Super Bowl week videos that he did, appearances on other shows and whatnot. And, that's why I think Cleveland is a possibility for him. I don't know if he'll go in the second pick in the draft. And there's even a scenario where Jackson Dart gets taken ahead of him. But as far as the character stuff, not everybody wants to bring that kind of circus to town. Again, it's more of a perception, I think, than it is reality. But, the last thing an NFL team wants is Deion Sanders questioning their usage of his son. So there's going to be some teams that I think are a little hesitant to pull that trigger. But as far as like character stuff, I don't view it that way. I think his leadership was obvious. First at Jackson State, turning around that program and hoisting it to the top of some of the traditionally black schools, and was great down there. Then he went to Colorado, a program that was as dead as disco when he got there. And he and Dad and Travis Hunter and a few others helped turn the thing around pretty quickly, even if, it took a year of adjustment there. But, I see an accurate quarterback. I see a quarterback with some real toughness. I think he's got great feel for the game and would be a great fit for somebody like Kevin Stefanski. Again, I don't know if he'll end up in New York or Cleveland or, possibly the Steelers. All these teams still could add quarterbacks. That's the mystery of it. So if he were to fall a little bit in round one, I don't necessarily think it would be driven by character reports, but fit, like skill set wise and also personality wise have to be, that's what makes the quarterback position unique in drafting is that, we come up with these rankings and these cumulative rankings and all this stuff and look at everybody's numbers and it could just come down to personal taste. The Giants may decide they want Jackson Dart better. He's a close confidant of Eli Manning, or vice versa. I should say Eli is a confidant of his, but sometimes these pairings sort of work themselves out more organically and more naturally. And so I don't know. I think some of that is a little bit of a smokescreen, but physically, he's nothing special. That's the crazy part. The son of Deion Sanders is not an amazing athlete, but his cerebral qualities, I think, will translate to the NFL.
Yeah, so he checks all the boxes for you as far as character goes. You did mention he's not a great physical specimen. So,
yeah,
your personal opinion, do you think that maybe he's being projected or maybe mocked a little bit too early? I mean, I know this is overall, it's seen as kind of a weak draft class, particularly the quarterbacks. Do you think there's, potential for bust there with Shedeur Sanders if you draft him in the top 10?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you draft a quarterback in the top 10, you feel pretty strongly about them right now. Obviously, last year was an unusual year. We had 6 go in the top 12. There was clearly a run at the position and different levels of expectation with each pick. Atlanta wasn't expecting Michael Penix to come in and start, but Bo Nix, taken 2 picks later, was, and so, or at least compete for a starting spot. So, everybody's got their different views on the timetables and the readiness and all that stuff. But obviously, if you take quarterback in the top 10 and he doesn't work out, that's going to be a tough one to swallow. Is it a lot easier if you take him 15th or 21st or 24th? Not terribly. There's still a loss felt there. So I think I could see a scenario where Cleveland or somebody swings back, into round one from the top of round 2 and moves up for a player like that. Again, it probably depends on, does Aaron Rodgers pick a team between now and the draft? Does Russell Wilson have a new job soon? Do some of these quarterback dominoes start falling? Are the Titans even interested in trading the top pick? Right now, I would peg them for Cam Ward, but you don't know. Maybe the Giants make him a blowaway offer and just say, we want him badly and don't want to play around with this pick. So, yes, of course, if you take a quarterback that high and you don't have that conviction on them and they fail, it's a failed process. But if you go about it the right way and understand what you're getting in a player like Sanders, I could absolutely see him fit in a little bit lower in round 1 and end up being a success.
Now, you brought up Jackson Dart, so I want to follow that up a little bit. Besides Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, who, again, we all assume will probably be top 10 picks, you have some of the other guys in the quarterback prospect group, like Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe. There's a few others. Is it possible that when their careers are all said and done, that a guy like Jackson Dart, you could be looking back on this draft and saying he had the best career?
Sure. Yeah. National, Gatorade High School Player of the Year in high school. I mean, he was terrific. Same award that, some future NFL quarterbacks won, Trevor Lawrence and whatnot. And, he was outstanding in high school, 5-star elite prospect. I would say in college, you saw incremental steps, and his last year really played his best ball. I think that the suspicion comes with the Lane Kiffin offense, and it's not to say that it's a bad offense, very effective one, but it doesn't always glean to scouts and evaluators what a quarterback is capable of, because there are so many first reads open. There are so many good open looks, deep shots galore. Obviously, it's a quarterback's dream to play in that kind of offense, even if they didn't quite have the same firepower as they have in the past. So, look, I felt like he made a steady enough improvement and has good traits, maybe a little bit better than Shedeur, maybe not quite as strong as Cam Ward, but not far off. I think similar. They're both kind of in that 6'2", stocky build, good arm. I think there's some overlap there, but your best hope is for him, I think, to land in kind of a high volume offense where he gets plenty of, layups as well as 3-pointers, if that makes sense. I mean, right. He's shown an ability to push the ball vertically, but I also think he needs a little bit of a help from the system. And so, is that a fit for the Giants? Is that something the Steelers would want to operate with? There are a few teams that obviously make a little more sense given the need at quarterback, but, I could see him, being, it's not like I have such a high opinion of Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders that Jackson Dart couldn't surpass them at some time. Of course, if you look at the success of a guy like Brock Purdy in San Francisco, if you put him in that kind of an offense, he could be better than that. That wouldn't stun me at all. And I know we have a hard time placing Purdy in like the quarterback hierarchy, but that would be certainly a peak for what he's able to do, I think, or close to it. Which would be his guys are going to get paid $50 million a year. So I think Jackson Dart absolutely has that chance, but he's just less of a sure thing, I think, than we saw last year with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. And I would put these guys in the same sort of sphere as I did JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Bo Nix, and perhaps on the lower end of that group.
Yeah, so I hear what you're saying, but we all know how desperate these teams get for
Absolutely.
a quarterback. Is there any chance in any scenario where he could go top 3 to one of those 3 quarterback needy teams after, let's say, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, and people could not believe that Daniel Jones could go number 6. Like when that was first introduced as an idea to we football watching humans, it did register with a lot of people, right? But as the draft got closer and you started hearing it more and more, you started to think, I guess that's the way they're going. So every team has their own draft board, their own plan, their own path. And while we may be sitting here saying, hey, I'd put a 2nd-round grade on them, I think the rules get thrown out the window if you don't have a quarterback. Right now, they've got Tommy DeVito and Jameis Winston. I don't know that the Giants, you would say, okay, they're all set. Maybe you draft a young guy later and you're fine. I don't think anyone's taken that approach. The Browns obviously have a lot to figure out, Steelers, et cetera, other quarterback needy teams. The Jets are kind of a wild card team picking number 7. So, yeah, there are several avenues. And the closer we get to the draft and the more buzz is sometimes, that leads to teams either, I don't want to say panicking, but getting into that twitchy spot where they're like, hey, we may not get our boy unless we move up or unless we get to this number ahead of the Jets at 7, let's say, or even, God forbid, ahead of the Giants at 3, So all those scenarios are possible. But obviously, we're going to track these veteran quarterback signings to see what the level of desperation is come April 26th.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I keep hearing that this draft class is not one of the strongest, and compared to recent drafts. So how do you think that might affect general managers and NFL front offices? How will it affect their strategy? Could we see more trades in round 1 because maybe these teams are just not sold on some of the prospects?
Yeah, you could see more activity. I mean, take a team like the Minnesota Vikings, who have the least amount of draft capital in this year's class, and I think only have 5 picks next year. They're sitting at number 24. If there is still a quarterback in play at that point, or perhaps a defensive lineman, a corner, a running back, a tight end, those are some of the stronger positions in this class. You could absolutely, I would imagine they're going to have a for sale sign hung on that pick, wanting to move down, add some extra ammo, that sort of thing. But then to your question as well, on the one hand, you say to yourself, sure, if there's a team that's stuck in a place where they don't think there's a prospect commensurate with the pick they're at, they're going to absolutely make those calls to trade back. But is there a buyer? There still has to be someone willing to come up. And there has to be a player on the board that fascinates them. That this year's top 10 is, to me, going to be, top 10, 12, somewhere in that, the top third of the first round, let's say, is going to be a lot thinner than in recent years. That said, maybe Cam Ward's a hit. Maybe Ashton Genty's a hit. Abdul Carter absolutely is, he's my top prospect. I think he could be a fantastic player. We mentioned Travis Hunter. These are some different dudes. Tyler Warren at tight end. I don't know if he's Travis Kelce, but he's really good. And I think could be a very strong Pro Bowl level tight end eventually. That's a slow developing position, but I would consider taking him in the top 10 this year. So, on the one hand, I think it's possible, but again, you got to have a dance partner in these situations. And if there aren't enough blue chip guys or enough players at a specific position of need for that team, it's hard to make a deal sometimes. So I am in the midst of finishing a mock where I have, I think, 4 trades in the first round. Mm-hmm. One of them involves the Minnesota pick. There's a couple other teams that are making kind of small incremental moves, but I think the quarterbacks could come off the board. The second and third guys, Shedeur and Jackson Dart, to places where another team is moving up for them. So that's just one possibility. Again, we don't have the full bank of information. So I'd say check back on that one is my answer.
Okay. And then I'll get you out of here on this last one. You mentioned Ashton Genty. So it got me thinking, generally teams' philosophies, from what we've seen in past years, although there's been some outliers, is that teams don't want to spend an early pick on a running back. But Genty seems to be a generational talent from what he's done in college anyways. Do you think he's worthy of a, let's say, top 10 pick, or because of the depth at the position? This is one of the positions in the draft where there's a lot of talent actually.
Yep.
Do you think that he may slide a bit down round 1 because there are so many options there at running back?
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. If a team like the Raiders at number 6, I put Genty number 6 in my first mock draft back in like late January, mid-January. I forget exactly when it was. And I got made fun of a little bit for that. And I thought, well, it's January, we'll see. But, that's been a pretty common landing spot for him. The Cowboys at 12 have been mentioned. You can see him going as late as maybe the Chargers pick. I haven't looked at a ton of mocks lately, but I think somewhere between about the 6th pick and the 20th pick is probably where he ends up landing, or the 21st, wherever LA is picking. But that's probably the range for him. Omarion Hampton from UNC is another back that is getting a lot of first round mention. He could go as high as Dallas if they don't get Genty. I don't think Genty is a generational back of the Bo Jackson, Herschel Walker, Eric Dickerson type quality. He's too small for that, in my opinion, and an excellent college back. Don't get me wrong. I think he has every chance to be a top 10 NFL running back. And we've seen the run game cycle back into the league, and that affects defenses, that affects how teams draft offensive linemen, the whole bit, right? How you perceive a team. And, the quarterback run game is obviously part of it. And he can do more as a receiver than he did last year. They made him such a workhorse in the backfield. But I think I liked Bijan Robinson just a smidgen more than I did Genty, and they're really close. I mean, and I loved Robinson. I thought he was pretty close to a generational back. He's been very good. I don't know that he's been, otherworldly. So that's the danger, right? Is that even with the run game kind of hot again, you may not get the same return as you might have in the 1980s when backs were king, and the other thing, as you mentioned, is the depth of the class. You might be able to get RJ Harvey in round 3 and get 85% of the value. That's pretty tempting, or you might be able to get DJ Giddens in round 4 or 5 and get 75% of the output. So, that's kind of the debate that's going on right now. Obviously the Philadelphia Eagles last year and the Ravens, getting guys like Barkley and Henry are not looking at with any regret at their moves. They paid a premium at the position. I know it's different for agency in the draft, but they got the returns, and so I think there are still some people who view that effect and the Josh Jacobs effect in Green Bay and say, if you get a premium back and you use them the right way, you can still get premium results from it. So for a run-heavy coach like Pete Carroll, it wouldn't shock me. Brian Schottenheimer's always been a run-heavy guy too. So, those teams certainly make sense, and I think there's a good chance at least one running back goes at either 6 or 12.
So just a quick follow-up. You don't believe he's a generational talent. Do you think he's maybe a little bit overhyped then, or
I think, well, I'll say this again. I hope I don't, get taken out of context here. I think he's terrific. Yeah. I think in a normal year, we may not be having quite the same discussion of him going 6th overall and that, I just think in a typical top 10 where you have a little bit more blue chip talent like last year or even the year before, he would be on the cusp of the top 10, just like Robinson was for me. I think he was my number 7 or 8 overall player in that draft or something. I can't remember exactly where I had him, but for a back being that high, that's pretty strong. All I meant to say was that I don't know that we're talking about a surefire Hall of Famer here. This is somebody who just you absolutely must mortgage the farm to get. I think that's kind of where I go when I think generational back. And I mean, outside of LaDainian and Tomlinson and a handful of guys, I mean, Barkley was close, but there just haven't been those kinds of guys available in the last 20, 25 years. So, maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. He is terrific. His contact balance, his ability to break through tackles. I just suspect that people need to kind of temper their expectations just a slight bit with him.
Fair explanation. All right, everybody. Eric Edholm. You can follow him on X at Eric_Edholm. And Eric, you mentioned you got a mock draft upcoming. Where and when can we find it?
I believe it's coming out either Wednesday or Thursday. I got to check the schedule again, but it's coming in a couple days. I've got like 1 or 2 more picks to make, and I've spent way too long like hemming and hawing over who the Ravens are going to take at 29 and all that. And that's what time of year it is. You get down in the weeds and really start grinding out those last few picks, and when you're done, you go back and say, wait, this doesn't make any sense, and you redo it. So it's a long, arduous process, but we're only a couple days away from that dropping.
Well, we know it's a busy time of the year for you, and we appreciate making a few minutes for us today. Thank you very much.
All right, you got it. My pleasure.